Resident assistant. Yes, so I was an RA, I was in every club, I was a very visible black student leader, and it was quite disappointing.
Did you do that because you felt you were a minority because of the color of your skin?
The answer to that is yes. I did that because I was thinking about today. I'm 33 now. I was thinking about the future, about how is it that Latinos, Asians have been able in 1 or 2 generations to move up the ladder as a group, as a community, own businesses, are in politics, or on corporate boards. Whereas as African immigrants, I was thinking about my uncle at the time and his friends. You know, they were very contented where they were. They were not fully engaged in their community. You know, in the local community, like in West Orange, I never saw my uncle go to the city board. I'm sure he went to his PTA, you know, for his kids. I don't know that for a fact. When you're a minority among a minority, because as a black immigrant, you're a minority in a minority. You know, one, you're black, which already makes you a minority. And then having language access, being foreign born, having an accent, not understanding all the nuances, you feel even much smaller. So I wanted to find out, how can I bond with other groups of women who they themselves have that similar perspective, which led me to my life's work today, you know, 10, 12 years later, in working on African immigrant issues. And I'm so grateful that that decision I made at 17, 18, now I'm able to tap into that immigrant pool of Latinos who have been doing this work for many, many, many years, that immigrant pool of Asian Americans who've been doing this work for many, many years. And of course, being a black woman, I have joined other black organizations such as the National Council of Negro Women, the NAACP. So being a minority within a minority makes your mind wonder.
And all of these challenges have helped define your life's work, which is what you do now, right?
I like to call myself an African immigrant activist. And it's part activist, part advocate, part lobbyist. I run a small organization not far from here, 9th and G. It's the Cameroon-American Council. And we have a very simple mission, is to build capacity, build relevance, and build visibility in African immigrant communities right here in the U.S. So we focus on U.S. domestic issues.
That has to be a bit difficult, if not very difficult, right?
Amarachi, you're right. Is the difficulty is just the same as starting a new business, not in that we want our rights. America, my sister lives in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma, every state has a state logo or state slogan. The state slogan for Oklahoma is Native Americans. So outside of the Native Americans, you know, all of America there's a land of immigrants. So they don't have more rights than I do. Right? They really don't. I don't feel it that way. I feel like at some point in your recent past, you know, you have family members that came from somewhere, unless, like my sister in Oklahoma, you're a Native American. So the difficulty has just been, in terms of philanthropy, just letting our community know that they have rights, that every time you pay tax, you're actually contributing in the U.S. So it's been challenging in getting 2 groups of people who both claim we don't exist. Because I work with this local, state, and federal government in letting them know, hey, my community pays taxes. We don't have access to your programs. We don't have access to your jobs, internships, boards, and commissions. And they're like, oh, what do you mean, African immigrants? We do outreach to blacks. Yes, we are blacks. We're a subsection of blacks. Just like when you say African-American, just like when you say Asian Americans, you mean Pakistani, Taiwanese, Chinese, Japanese. When you say African-American, you're talking about the Afro-Latinos, Afro-Caribbeans, Afro-Europeans, African immigrants, and of course the native African Americans. So your one-size-fits-all messaging does not get into my African immigrant community. And they said, oh, I see, you're immigrants. Of course, we have outreach for the immigrants. Yes, you do. Your immigrant outreach assumes we all speak Spanish. We're all Latinos. It does not look at those who speak Amharic for the Ethiopians, you know, French, Hausa, and the many, 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 many languages that we speak in our community. So that's just trying to crack the government. Our community is also a challenge, because then they say, but we're in a foreign land. You know, where we come from, we can't even talk. Well, guess what? It's a new day. In this foreign land, do you know what we do? We pay taxes. We make America look good. As African immigrants, we're the most educated immigrants when we get into the country. We're the most educated Americans when we stay in the country. When President Obama talks about he wants America to outperform and out-innovate the rest of the world, he is not going to be able to do that without the most educated group. So the challenges come just from connecting these two groups to know their rights and to know that and that we matter. Some of the things we tell the government is, after the heyday, Dr. King died, you know, fighting for the civil rights that we're fighting for now. After Dr. King died, they had riots all across the U.S. One of those places were in Harlem. It was defunct, abandoned houses. The city of New York was losing money in parts of 116th and 125th Street in Harlem, New York. About 20 years later, the Senegalese moved in, started having hair braiding shops. They're taking up buildings with a mosque. And now the city of New York can register tax dollars because of my Senegalese who moved in there. Right here in Washington, D.C., on U Street, after the riots, it was defunct, you know, drug-infested buildings. Who came in? The Ethiopians started having Ethiopian restaurants. The city of D.C. registering tax dollars. The Somali-Americans in Minnesota, the Cameroonians in Prince George's County, Maryland, the Nigerians in Houston. I can go on and on and on. We are contributing in America. We deserve our rights here.
Still ahead, up to $5.4 billion is pledged at a donor conference to rebuild Gaza. Please join us again. Welcome back. 50 days of conflict has left an enormous amount of damage in Gaza. The 7-week conflict, which ended in a truce on August 26th, killed more than 2,100 Palestinians and displaced at least 100,000 Gazans from their homes. During a donors' conference in the Egyptian capital, Cairo, $5.4 billion was pledged by a number of countries considered stakeholders in the region. The funds will go to the Palestinian government, which has promised that much of it will be used to rebuild Gaza. Palestine has suffered the most since the fighting began, losing as many as 2,104 people, most of them civilians. On the other hand, only 67 Israeli soldiers were said to have died in the conflict, and 6 civilians killed in Israel. Among those present at the conference were the UK, the US, the EU, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates and Norway, among envoys from dozens of countries hosted by Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. The US pledged $212 million in new aid, while the United Arab Emirates and Turkey both committed $200 million. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry emphasized the urgency of the donations, especially for those displaced by the fighting, because winter is fast approaching. The UK announced it was making a $32 million donation. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi instead focused on Israel and Palestine ending the conflict and begin the journey to peace. Israel was not invited to the conference, but the country's foreign minister, Avigdor Lieberman, said any rebuilding efforts could only be done with Israel's approval. Located between Israel and Egypt, the Gaza Strip has been a recurring flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for years. It was occupied by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War. It was occupied by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War. And Israel pulled out her troops and settlers in 2005. Though this could be regarded the end of Israel's occupation of the region, it still exercises control over its borders, waters and airspace. The southern border, however, is controlled by Egypt. And that's the program this week. Many thanks for watching. I am Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.